My husband sent me a text message at exactly 7 in the evening. It read, I am landing in Chicago for the pitch meeting. The hotel Wi-Fi is terrible, and my cell signal is fading. Do not bother calling tonight. I love you, get some rest. I read the message twice. The only problem with his lie was that I was not at home resting. I was sitting exactly 5 tables away from him at Le Bilboquet, one of the most exclusive French restaurants in the center of Buckhead. He was not in Chicago. He was sitting in a velvet booth, feeding a raw oyster to a blonde girl who looked barely old enough to rent a car. And to make the ultimate betrayal complete, sitting right across from them, raising a glass of vintage champagne were his sister Valerie and her arrogant white husband Kevin. I had paid for that champagne. I paid for the tailored suit on my husband. And tonight, I was going to make sure they all choked on my money. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that a woman should never shrink herself to make an insecure man feel tall. You will definitely want to hear how I handled the most expensive dinner of my husband. My name is Renee. I am 35 years old, and I built a luxury brand management empire from the ground up. I am a Black woman who worked twice as hard to get half the recognition until I decided to stop asking for seats at the table and bought the entire building instead. Darren and I had been married for 4 years. On paper, he was an investment consultant. In reality, his biggest and only successful investment was putting a ring on my finger. I funded his lifestyle. I funded his sister. I even threw business toward his brother-in-law Kevin, a real estate broker who loved to act like he was the smartest man in the room despite living off my commission checks. I sat alone at my small corner table. The restaurant was dimly lit, filled with the clinking of crystal and the hum of old money. My client had canceled our dinner at the last minute, leaving me to enjoy a quiet meal by myself. I had not planned on catching a cheating husband tonight. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and watched the performance unfolding just 20 feet away. Darren was laughing. It was that loud, chest-puffing laugh he only used when he was trying to impress someone. The blonde girl, who I later found out was named Sierra, was giggling and resting her hand high up on his thigh. She was an intern at his firm. Her silk dress was cut extremely low, but what disgusted me more than her presence was the complicity of my own family. Valerie was smiling at Sierra, acting like they were old friends. This was the same Valerie who called me crying 3 months ago because she could not afford her car payment, which I quietly paid. And then there was Kevin. He leaned back in his leather chair, a smug grin plastered across his face, completely in his element while celebrating my humiliation. The tables at Le Bilboquet are positioned closely together to create an intimate atmosphere, which meant their voices carried easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. I signaled my waiter to keep the bread coming and simply listened. Kevin raised his glass. I could hear his booming, arrogant voice cutting through the restaurant chatter. He looked right at Darren and smirked. I have to say, Darren, you finally got it right. I told you from day one that marrying that ice queen was just a stepping stone. Renee is a boring corporate workaholic. All she is good for is paying the bills. You got the capital you needed from her, and now you get to actually enjoy your life with someone fun like Sierra. Darren laughed, completely agreeing with the man insulting his loyal wife. Valerie chimed in, tossing her hair. Seriously, Darren, Renee is always so intense and demanding. She acts like she is better than everyone just because she has money. Sierra is a breath of fresh air. You deserve to be happy without someone constantly making you feel small. I sat there perfectly still. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. Women who build empires do not cry in public over weak men. We strategize. I looked at the 4 of them, a circle of leeches sucking the lifeblood from my bank account while spitting on my hard-earned name. Kevin was the most vocal, offering to show Darren and Sierra some luxury penthouses the following week. He was already planning to make a real estate commission off the cheating couple, probably using my own money to fund the down payment. The sheer audacity of it was almost poetic. They were ordering the most expensive items on the menu: caviar, imported steaks, more champagne. Most women would have walked over there, flipped the table, and thrown a glass of wine in her face. But a public screaming match would only give Kevin exactly what he wanted: the stereotype of an angry, out-of-control black woman. I refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I caught the eye of the restaurant manager. I smiled warmly at him and kept my voice low. "I would like to cover the bill for the table of 4 near the window," I said. "Please add a generous 30% gratuity." I handed him my American Express black card. He processed the $3,000 charge. I signed the receipt, then wrote a message on a napkin. "Your wife sends her regards from Chicago." I left the restaurant, knowing the war had just finally begun. I pulled my car into the sprawling driveway of my Buckhead mansion and parked. The night air was heavy and still. I walked through the massive double doors and dropped my keys on the marble console table. I did not have to wait long. Barely 20 minutes passed before the front door swung open and slammed shut. Darren burst into the foyer, breathing heavily. His face was flushed and his tie was undone. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon to save his own life. He spotted me sitting on the velvet sofa in the living room, calmly sipping a glass of iced water. "Renee, please, you have to listen to me." He started, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "You completely misunderstood what you saw at the restaurant tonight." I placed my glass on the coaster. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw anything. I simply looked at him and asked him to explain how I misunderstood my husband feeding oysters to a 23-year-old intern while my credit card paid for their champagne. Darren ran his hands through his hair, pacing the floor. "Sierra is not just an intern," he stammered. "She is the daughter of Richard Sterling. You know Sterling, the massive tech investor I have been trying to sign for 6 months. I was only at that dinner to secure his portfolio. Sierra is his youngest, and he asked me to show her the ropes of the city. I was just entertaining a client. It was strictly business." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. It was a pathetic lie. I knew the names of every major investor in Atlanta, and Richard Sterling did not have a daughter named Sierra. But before I could dismantle his ridiculous story, the front door opened again. Valerie and Kevin walked in. They did not knock. They never knocked because they felt entitled to the home I paid for. Valerie marched straight over to her brother and put a protective hand on his shoulder, glaring at me as if I was the one who had committed a crime. "Renee, you are overreacting as usual," Valerie sneered. "Darren was working. He is always working to build a future for you, and you embarrass him in front of everyone by walking out and leaving a passive-aggressive note on a napkin. Do you know how humiliating that was for him?" I looked at my sister-in-law, marveling at her audacity. The woman was wearing a designer handbag I bought her for her birthday, defending the man who was actively destroying our marriage. Then Kevin stepped forward. He crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself up to look authoritative. Kevin was a real estate broker who loved to tell everyone he was a top-tier professional. The truth was, his only high-end listings were the commercial properties I tossed his way out of pity. "Look, Renee," Kevin said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I get it. You grew up tough. You had to fight for everything you have, and that is great. But you are in high society now. You cannot bring those ghetto insecurities into this lifestyle. Rich men network. They take out clients. They buy expensive dinners. That is how the game is played. You sitting there acting like an angry, overly sensitive black woman is only going to ruin his reputation. You need to calm down and learn your place." The room went dead silent. The words "ghetto insecurities" echoed in my mind. He was standing in the foyer of a $5 million home that I owned, telling me I needed to learn my place. He was living off the commission from my corporate leases, telling me how high society worked. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to stand up and slap the arrogance right off his pale face. Darren nodded along with Kevin, playing the victim perfectly. He looked at me with sad, puppy dog eyes. "I am just trying to provide for us, Renee," he whispered. I asked you not to call because I knew you would not understand the pressure I am under to land this account. And then you showed up and made a scene. They stood there like a united front. The cheating husband, the enabling sister, and the racist, arrogant brother-in-law. They were all banking on the fact that I loved Darren too much to leave or that I was too exhausted to fight back. They expected me to yell. They expected me to cry and beg for the truth. But anger is a luxury you cannot afford when you are planning a war. If I confronted them now, they would only hide their tracks. I needed them comfortable. I needed them to think they had won, so they would get sloppy. So I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders drop, and I forced a soft, vulnerable expression onto my face. I looked at Darren and let a single tear slip down my cheek. I am sorry, I said, my voice trembling just enough to make it believable. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. Kevin smirked and muttered something about how women always overreact before they listen to reason. Darren stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I wrapped my arms around him, breathing in the scent of his expensive cologne, mixed with the faint smell of blonde hair extensions. It made my stomach turn, but I held on tight. "It is okay, baby," he whispered, kissing the top of my head. "I know you work hard and you get stressed. Just trust me. Just trust. Everything I do is for us." I promised him I would do better. I thanked Valerie and Kevin for coming over to mediate. I played the part of the foolish, apologetic wife flawlessly. Kevin patted Darren on the back and told him they would talk tomorrow about some property listings. Then he and Valerie finally walked out the door, heading back to the condo I helped them secure. Darren kissed my forehead one more time and told me he was going to take a shower to wash off the stress of the evening. I watched him walk up the grand curved staircase. His posture relaxed, his confidence fully restored. He really thought he had outsmarted me. The moment I heard the bathroom door click shut upstairs, the vulnerability vanished from my face. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. I walked over to the velvet sofa and sat down. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. I did not open my messages or my emails. I opened a hidden application buried deep in a folder labeled Home Security. A grid of high-definition video feeds popped up on my screen. I had installed hidden cameras in every room of this house 3 months ago when Darren first started coming home late. I never told him about them. I tapped on the feed for his home office. The room was dark, but the night vision feature showed his heavy steel safe sitting securely in the corner. My husband thought I was just an angry, insecure woman. He forgot that I built an empire by outsmarting people who thought they were smarter than me. I smiled as I watched the silent camera feed. The charade was over, and the real hunt had just begun. The clock in the hallway struck midnight. The house was completely silent, except for the low, rhythmic sound of Darren snoring in the master bedroom. I lay there for a few more minutes staring at the ceiling, just to be absolutely sure he was in a deep sleep. He always slept like a baby after a glass of bourbon and a night of lying to my face. I slipped out from under the silk sheets, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. I did not turn on any lights. I knew every inch of this $5 million house because I had picked out every single detail myself. I walked down the long hallway toward his home office. The room was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where he managed his so-called investment consulting business. In reality, it was a room I decorated and funded where he played pretend. I paid for the imported mahogany desk. I paid for the custom bookshelves. I even paid for the leather chair he sat in while he lied to me. I closed the heavy oak door behind me and locked it. The only light came from the moonlight spilling through the large, arched windows. I moved straight to the corner of the room where a heavy steel safe sat hidden behind a faux leather armchair. Darren thought he was secretive. He thought he had me completely fooled. But a man who relies on his wife to pay his credit card bills is rarely as smart as he believes he is. I knelt in front of the safe and placed my fingers on the keypad. I knew he would never pick a complex combination because he could never remember passwords. I typed in the date of our wedding anniversary, The keypad flashed green and the heavy metal door clicked open. It was almost poetic that the day he promised to be faithful was the key to unlocking his betrayal. I reached inside. The air in the safe smelled like stale paper and his expensive cologne. There were a few velvet boxes containing watches I had bought him over the years, a stack of cash and a few random envelopes. But I was not looking for love letters. I did not care about hotel receipts or pictures of him and the blonde intern. Affairs are cheap and predictable. I was looking for the real money trail. A man like Darren does not sneak around with a girl like Sierra without spending heavily to impress her. He needed capital to maintain his facade, and I knew he did not have any of his own. My hand brushed against a thick manila folder tucked all the way in the back. It was heavy and stuffed with official-looking documents. I pulled it out and turned on a small reading lamp on his mahogany desk, keeping the beam pointed downward so the light would not bleed under the door. I opened the folder and began reading through the documents. My breathing slowed. The sheer audacity of what I was looking at made the air in the room feel thin. It was a commercial real estate packet. The first few pages were glossy printouts of a luxury penthouse located in Midtown Atlanta. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a private terrace overlooking the city skyline, and a price tag of $2.5 million. There were text messages printed out and stapled to the back of the brochures. They were between Darren and Kevin. Kevin had written, "Bro, this is the one she is going to love. Its sterling will be blown away." Darren had replied, "Let us lock it down fast before Renee starts asking about the accounts." I stared at the words. But a man with zero actual income cannot just buy a $2.5 million penthouse on a whim. I flipped to the next section of the folder and found out exactly how he planned to pay for it. It was a loan application. A second mortgage application, to be exact. Darren was attempting to take out a massive loan using our Buckhead mansion as collateral. The mansion that I bought with my own hard-earned money, the mansion that was legally owned by my private corporate LLC to protect it from parasites exactly like him. I read through the fine print meticulously. He had listed himself as the primary applicant and used my company tax returns to prove income. He had completely fabricated a document giving himself executive power over my LLC, claiming he was a managing partner. And the broker listed on the application, the person pushing this fraudulent deal through the system and preparing to take a massive six-figure commission check, was none other than Kevin. Kevin, the man who had stood in my foyer just hours ago, telling me I needed to learn my place in high society. Kevin, the man who sneered at my ghetto insecurities while actively conspiring to steal millions of dollars from my assets to fund his brother-in-law's young mistress. They were not just laughing at me behind my back. They were attempting to strip me of everything I had built. They wanted to leave me holding the bag for a midtown penthouse while Kevin pocketed the commission and Darren played sugar daddy. My hands did not shake as I held the papers. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over me. Women who break down and cry over cheating husbands lose their leverage. They let their emotions dictate their actions and they end up with half of what they deserve. Women who calculate and collect evidence win the war. I pulled my phone from my pocket and took clear, high-resolution photos of every single page in that folder. I made sure to capture the dates, the fabricated income statements, and Kevin's brokerage license number stamped on the bottom of the mortgage application. I reached the very last page of the stack. It was the final authorization form for the bank to release the funds. It was completely filled out except for one crucial detail. The line for the primary property owner was blank. Darren could fake my company letterhead, and he could lie about his income, but he could not bypass the bank requiring a wet signature from the managing director of the LLC. That was me. Stuck to the bottom of the signature page was a bright yellow sticky note. The handwriting belonged to Kevin. It read, "The bank needs Renee to sign this in person or with a certified notary. I have a guy who will look the other way. Meeting is scheduled for this Friday at 2 in the afternoon in my office. Make sure you practice her signature, bro. We cannot afford to mess this up. Friday. It was currently Tuesday morning. Darren had exactly 3 days before he planned to sit in Kevin's office and commit federal mortgage fraud using my name. He thought he had outsmarted the angry black woman. He thought I was safely tucked away in my naive little world, oblivious to the financial noose they were trying to slip around my neck. He thought my silence was submission. I carefully put the documents back into the manila folder, exactly the way I found them, making sure every edge was perfectly aligned. I placed the folder back into the safe, closed the heavy steel door, and listened for the locking mechanism to engage. I turned off the desk lamp and stood in the dark office for a moment, staring out at the manicured lawn I paid for. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with my money. They were about to learn that the person who funds the bank also has the power to burn it down. The next morning, I woke up before Darren and went straight to my home gym. I needed to burn off the adrenaline from the night before. While I ran on the treadmill, I put in my wireless earbuds, but I was not listening to music. I had connected my phone to the audio feed of the hidden microphones I placed in his office and his car. Darren was leaving the house. I heard the heavy thud of his car door closing and the engine roaring to life. A few seconds later, I heard the familiar ringtone of him placing an outgoing call via Bluetooth. Kevin picked up on the second ring. His voice was loud and grating even through the audio feed. "What is the status, bro?" Kevin asked. "Did she buy your whole networking excuse?" "I'm not sure, man," Darren replied, his voice laced with anxiety. "She said she was sorry, and she acted like everything was fine, but she is too quiet today. You know how Renee gets. She does not just let things go. What if she refuses to sign the paperwork on Friday? If we do not get her signature on that mortgage, the bank is going to pull the funding for the penthouse and Sierra is going to walk." I kept running on the treadmill, my breath steady. I listened as Kevin let out a long, exasperated sigh. "You panic too much, Darren," Kevin said smoothly. "I told you I have a backup plan if the Ice Queen decides to be difficult." "What backup plan?" Darren asked. "Listen closely," Kevin said, lowering his voice as if someone could hear him through the phone line. "Renee has been working like a dog for years, right? She built that company from nothing. She is stressed. She is paranoid. She is exhibiting classic signs of bipolar mania induced by severe work exhaustion." "What are you talking about?" Darren snapped. "Renee is not bipolar. She is the most calculated person I know. She is whatever my doctor friend says she is." Kevin chuckled darkly. "Look, I have a buddy, Dr. Evans, who owes me a massive favor from a real estate deal that went south. He runs a private psychiatric clinic. If Renee starts acting crazy or refuses to sign, we bring Evans to the house. He evaluates her and signs a medical declaration stating she is temporarily unfit to make financial decisions due to a mental breakdown." Darren went completely silent on the other end of the line. The sheer evil of the plan hung heavily in the air. "Think about it, bro," Kevin continued, his voice dripping with venom. "As her husband, if she is declared mentally incapacitated, you automatically get emergency medical and financial power of attorney. You step in as the managing director of her LLC to keep the business running. You sign the mortgage documents yourself. We close on the penthouse by Monday. We send her to a luxury wellness retreat for a month to rest, and by the time she gets out, it is a done deal." I stopped the treadmill. My heart pounded against my ribs, but not from the exercise. They were not just trying to steal my money anymore. They were planning to strip me of my sanity, my freedom, and my basic human rights. Kevin was weaponizing my identity against me, relying on the racist trope of the angry, unstable black woman to discredit my entire existence and steal my empire. And the man I had slept next to for 4 years, the man whose life I had entirely funded, was actually considering it. "I do not know." "Man," Darren finally said, his voice wavering. "That is a federal crime. If we get caught, we are done." "We will not get caught," Kevin shot back aggressively. "Who is going to question a concerned husband trying to get his overworked wife some help? Just be ready." If she pushes back on Friday, we make the call to Evans. The call disconnected. I stood in the middle of my home gym, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Most women would have broken down right then and there. The realization that your husband is willing to institutionalize you to buy a house for his mistress is a psychological blow that could destroy a person. But tears are for the helpless, and I had never been helpless a day in my life. I walked into my master bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the freezing cold water wash over me. My mind was clear, sharp, and deadly. They wanted to play with federal crimes. They wanted to forge signatures and falsify medical records to commit mortgage fraud. They had just handed me the exact rope I needed to hang them both. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped a towel around myself, and picked up my phone. I bypassed my contacts and manually dialed a number I had memorized years ago during a corporate security seminar. The line rang twice before a deep, professional voice answered. "Marcus speaking," the voice said. "Hello, Special Agent Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Renee, and I need to report a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and medical identity theft involving a licensed real estate broker. I have the audio recordings, the forged documents, and the exact time and place the crime will take place." There was a brief pause on the line before the FBI agent responded. "I am listening. Renee, tell me everything." I put my phone down on the bathroom counter and let out a long breath. The FBI agent had given me strict instructions to gather all the physical evidence and act completely normal. I was putting on my robe when the heavy chime of the front doorbell echoed through the house. Darren was at work, and I was not expecting any visitors. I tied the belt of my robe and walked down the grand staircase. When I checked the security monitor, I saw her. It was Eleanor, Darren's mother, standing on the porch holding a baked pie like she was starring in a 50s sitcom. I opened the door, and before I could even say hello, she pushed past me and walked straight into the kitchen. She set the pie on the marble island and turned to look at me with a pitiful, condescending smile. "Valerie called me this morning," Eleanor said, sighing heavily. "She told me about the little misunderstanding at the restaurant last night. Renee, honey, we need to have a talk. Woman to woman." I stood there staring at the woman who raised the man currently plotting to institutionalize me. Eleanor was wearing a pearl necklace and a tweed jacket, looking every bit the Southern matriarch she pretended to be. She motioned for me to sit on the bar stool, but I remained standing, my face an emotionless mask. "Darren loves you," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But you have to understand the pressure he is under. You are always working, Renee. You are always focused on your business and your money. A man needs to feel like the king of his castle. He needs a traditional wife who makes him feel big and strong. If he strayed a little bit or found some harmless entertainment, it is only because you have emasculated him with your success. You need to look past these little mistakes and learn to compromise. That is what marriage is about." I listened to her entire speech without blinking. This was the root of the rot in my husband. He was raised by a woman who taught him that his fragile ego was more important than basic respect and loyalty. She was standing in the kitchen. I paid for telling me to endure his infidelity because my ambition made him feel small. She actually believed that my role as a successful Black woman was to shrink myself so her mediocre son could take up more space. I did not yell. I did not throw her pie in the trash. I simply turned around and walked into my home office. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one where I kept the physical copies of all my financial generosity toward this parasitic family. I pulled out a thick red folder and walked back into the kitchen, dropping it flat on the marble island, right next to her baked goods. Eleanor looked at the folder, and then at me, her fake smile faltering. "What is this?" she asked. "That is the reality of your traditional values, Eleanor," I said, my voice dangerously calm. 2 years ago, Darren came to me crying because the IRS was going to seize your house. You had not paid your property taxes in 6 years. You owed $85,000, and the federal government was ready to put you on the street. You cried on my sofa begging for help because your own blood relatives would not lift a finger for you. Eleanor turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. Darren did not have a dime to his name. I continued stepping closer to her. Kevin and Valerie refused to help you, claiming they were tight on cash while driving luxury cars. So I wrote the check. I paid the $85,000 out of my corporate account to save the roof over your head. I did not do it because I wanted to be a traditional submissive wife. I did it because I pitied you. But do not ever stand in my house, the house my money built, and tell me that I need to make myself smaller so your worthless son can feel like a man. If he wanted to be the king of the castle, he should have bought his own castle instead of trying to steal mine. Eleanor stared at the bank statements spilling out of the red folder. The exact copies of the cashier checks made out to the Internal Revenue Service were right there in black and white. Her entire facade crumbled. The righteous matriarch routine vanished, leaving only the embarrassed silence of a woman who knew she was living on borrowed time and my charity. She knew that without me, her entire family would be financially ruined. You need to leave, I said softly, pointing toward the front door. And take your pie with you. She did not say a word. She grabbed her purse and practically ran out of the front door, the heavy wood clicking shut behind her. I stood in the quiet kitchen, feeling nothing but disgust. They really thought they could manipulate me from every angle. They thought guilt and tradition and family pressure would break me down. They severely underestimated the strength of a woman who had pulled herself up from nothing to build an empire. I walked back into my office and sat down at my desk. Eleanor's visit was exactly the push I needed to finalize the next phase of my plan. If Darren and Kevin were planning to forge my signature on a second mortgage to steal my house, I needed to make sure they had no house to steal. I opened my laptop and pulled up a secure encrypted email chain with David. David was a tech billionaire. I had helped rebrand 3 years ago after a messy public relations scandal. We had become close friends, and he had been looking for a private luxury property in Buckhead to use as a corporate retreat. I had mentioned selling the mansion a few weeks ago when I first started suspecting Darren was cheating, and he had immediately offered to buy it in cash off the market. The digital contract was already sitting in my inbox. The terms were incredibly simple. A $5 million all-cash transaction with a 24-hour wire transfer and a clause that allowed me to maintain possession of the property for another week to finalize my affairs. Because the house was owned entirely by my private LLC, Darren had absolutely no legal rights to it. He was not on the deed. He was not on the title. He was just a guest living in my space, enjoying a lifestyle he could never afford on his own. I reviewed the document one last time, checking the routing numbers for the offshore trust account I had set up specifically for this transaction. The money would go directly into an account that Darren did not even know existed securely out of his reach. I scrolled down to the bottom of the electronic document. The bank needed my wet signature for their fraudulent mortgage application to buy the mistress a penthouse, but David only needed my digital authorization for a completely legal and final sale. I typed my full name into the signature box and hit submit. The screen flashed a green confirmation message. The sale was finalized. The $5 million mansion Darren was planning to use as collateral no longer belonged to me. It belonged to a billionaire who employed his own private armed security team. Darren was going to walk into Kevin's office on Friday to steal a house that was already legally gone. I leaned back in my leather chair and smiled, listening to the absolute silence of my former home. The chessboard was set and my enemies were blindly marching right into the trap. The next morning, Darren walked into the kitchen whistling a cheerful tune. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit that I had custom ordered for him from Milan. He poured himself a cup of coffee and kissed my cheek, acting like the perfect, loving husband. He actually believed his mother had put me in my place yesterday. He thought my silence was submission, and my calm demeanor meant I had accepted my role as the blind, bankrolling wife. I watched him walk out the door, tossing his car keys in the air, completely unaware that he was leaving a house he no longer had any claim to. About 2 hours later, I was sitting in my downtown office, reviewing the transition documents for my trust fund, when my phone screen lit up. It was a high-level fraud alert notification from American Express. The message detailed a pending transaction on the supplementary black card that I had issued to Darren. The location was a high-end diamond boutique in Buckhead. The amount was exactly $150,000. I stared at the screen. The audacity of this man was almost impressive. He was not just buying his 23-year-old intern a luxury penthouse with my money. He was buying her an engagement ring. He was promising her a life of luxury, proposing a future built entirely on my hard work and late nights. He felt so invincible, so confident, that I was successfully subdued, that he did not even try to hide the massive purchase. He probably had Kevin standing right next to him at the jewelry counter, hyping him up and telling him that real men do whatever they want. He simply swiped the card, assuming I would just pay the bill like I always did to avoid a messy family argument. The old Renee would have immediately frozen the card. She would have called him screaming, demanding an explanation and forcing a public confrontation. But the woman sitting in this office was not the old Renee. I was a woman building a flawless trap. If I froze the card right now, Darren would panic. He might change his plans or accelerate his timeline with Kevin and the corrupt doctor. I needed him to feel powerful. I needed him to stay on his exact schedule so every piece of my revenge would hit him at the exact same moment. I picked up my phone and dialed the private concierge number for my American Express account. A polite representative named William answered immediately. "William," I said, keeping my voice smooth and professional. "I received an alert for a large transaction on the supplementary card ending in 402. Please approve the $150,000 purchase." There was a brief pause on the line before William confirmed the manual approval. He then asked if I needed anything else. "Yes, William. I do," I continued. "I need to establish a set of shadow rules for that specific supplementary card moving forward. I want you to approve any minor daily transactions under $10,000. Let him buy his expensive coffee, let him buy dinner, let him think the account is perfectly fine. But I need you to schedule a hard lock on the card to take effect exactly at 8 in the evening this coming Saturday. And by a hard lock, I mean the account ceases to exist for him. It will decline instantly, and the automated system should flag it as an invalid account." William typed on his keyboard, reading the instructions back to me, to ensure they were absolutely correct. "Approve all minor transactions and schedule a total account shutdown for Saturday at exactly 8 p.m. "It is done, Miss Renee," he confirmed. I hung up the phone and let out a soft laugh. Darren had his diamond ring. He had his illusion of wealth and control. But what he did not know was that the very card sitting in his expensive leather wallet was now a ticking time bomb. I knew exactly why Saturday at 8 in the evening was the perfect time for the detonation. I had heard him planning it on the hidden audio feeds with Kevin. This Saturday was the day Darren had booked a private dining room at a prestigious Michelin star restaurant downtown. He invited Sierra, Valerie, and Kevin for a massive celebration. They were going to drink the finest vintage champagne to toast his new engagement and celebrate the successful closing of their fraudulent penthouse deal. They were going to sit around a table laughing at my expense, toasting to a future funded by my destruction. Darren would reach for the check, fully expecting my money to save him once again in front of his new fiancée and his smug brother-in-law. I closed my laptop and packed my briefcase. Darren had exactly 3 days of false power left. 3 days until he sat in the most expensive restaurant in the city, surrounded by his enablers, and realized that his entire world was nothing but a fragile house of cards, and I had just pulled out the bottom row. Thursday evening arrived with a heavy downpour of rain. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when Darren walked in holding a massive bouquet of red roses. He had a huge smile on his face, playing the role of the devoted husband perfectly. He told me to get dressed because he had made a surprise reservation at my favorite Italian restaurant. He said he wanted to make up for the misunderstanding earlier in the week and celebrate our marriage. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting the stage for his final act of deception. He needed me isolated, relaxed, and preferably intoxicated, so he could slip his fraudulent documents right under my nose. I smiled taking the roses and thanked him for being so thoughtful. I walked upstairs and put on a stunning black dress, acting like the naive wife who was easily swayed by a few cheap flowers. We arrived at the dimly lit restaurant and Darren immediately ordered an expensive bottle of wine. He poured my glass to the brim and kept encouraging me to drink. "You work too hard, Renee," he said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "You are always carrying the weight of the company. Tonight, I just want you to relax and let me take care of you." I nodded and took a small sip of the red wine. For the next 2 hours, I put on the performance of a lifetime. Every time he looked away, I poured a little bit of my wine into the dark water glass next to my plate. I let my eyelids droop. I let my posture slump. I giggled at his terrible jokes and acted completely exhausted and tipsy. He sat across from me, his eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. He truly believed his charm was working. When the waiter cleared our dinner plates, Darren let out a casual sigh. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Baby, I am so sorry to bring business to dinner," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like he was embarrassed. "My assistant reminded me that the annual insurance renewals for the house and the company cars are due tomorrow. They just need your signature on the bottom line. It will take 2 seconds, and then we can get dessert." He slid the stack of papers across the white tablecloth. He had carefully placed bright yellow sticky notes on the signature lines. I looked down at the documents. The first 2 pages were indeed standard insurance forms, but I could see the thicker paper stock of the commercial loan application sandwiched right in the middle. He was trying to trick me into signing the second mortgage application without reading it, so he would not have to risk forging it in front of a notary. While he was busy pointing at the sticky notes, my phone vibrated in my clutch. I slipped it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text message from my lead attorney. The message read, "The irrevocable trust is fully executed. 100% of your corporate assets, intellectual property, and liquid capital are now legally transferred and secured." A warm wave of absolute victory washed over me. An irrevocable trust meant that my wealth was completely locked away from Darren. Even if we divorced, he could not touch a single penny. And combined with the secret sale of the mansion, my financial empire was now a fortress. I was untouchable. I looked back up at Darren. His eyes were darting nervously between my face and the papers. I picked up the expensive fountain pen he offered me. I did not argue. I did not ask to read the fine print. I just let out a dramatic, tired sigh and scribbled my name exactly where he pointed. I made sure to leave out my middle initial, making the signature legally inconsistent, but good enough to fool him and his arrogant brother-in-law. Darren let out a breath he had clearly been holding for days. He quickly gathered the papers and shoved them back into his briefcase as if they might catch fire. "Thank you, baby," he said, kissing my hand. "You are the best." The rest of the dinner was a blur of his excessive talking and fake future planning. He was practically buzzing with adrenaline, thinking he had just secured $2.5 million of my money to buy a love nest for his young intern. I sat there smiling softly, knowing he was holding a signed document for a house I no longer owned. The next morning was Friday. Darren woke up early and dressed in a rush, claiming he had an urgent breakfast meeting with a client. I watched him pull out of the driveway from my bedroom window. I already knew where he was going. I opened my laptop and connected to the hidden audio feed in his car. He drove straight to Kevin's real estate office. The audio crackled as he walked into the building and greeted Kevin. "Did you get it?" Kevin asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Darren laughed a loud, arrogant sound. "Of course I got it, bro. I got her drunk on Barolo and slipped it right into a stack of insurance renewals." She signed it without even blinking. She is so clueless when she is tired. Good boy, Kevin praised him. The bank just sent the secure portal link. I am scanning the signed application right now. Once I hit submit, the underwriters will process the final approval, and the funds will wire by tomorrow morning. I sat on my bed listening to the sound of the scanner humming in Kevin's office. Kevin was an active participant, using his licensed broker credentials to submit a fraudulent loan application obtained through deliberate deception. All right, Kevin announced, his voice full of smug satisfaction. The file is uploaded. We are officially in the system. I picked up my phone and dialed Special Agent Marcus, forwarding him the audio file I had just recorded. I informed him that the digital submission had just taken place, crossing state lines over a secure banking network. Thank you, Renee. Marcus replied, his tone completely serious. We have the digital footprint. The crime is now federally documented. I closed my laptop. The crime of federal wire fraud was now officially in motion. They had crossed the point of no return. The trap was no longer just set. It had completely snapped shut around their necks. Now all I had to do was pack my bags for Paris and wait for Saturday night. It was Friday afternoon, and the Atlanta skyline was glowing under the warm sun. I sat in my corner office on the 40th floor of my corporate building holding a freshly brewed espresso. My assistant had just cleared my schedule for the rest of the day, leaving me in complete privacy. I opened my laptop and clicked on a highly encrypted application. Earlier that month, I had a security specialist embed a high-definition microcamera and microphone into the custom leather key fob of Darren's car keys. He was obsessed with that car, and he took those keys absolutely everywhere he went. He usually tossed them onto the nearest counter or table, giving me a perfect wide-angle view of his surroundings. The video feed flickered to life. Darren had just placed his keys on a sleek marble countertop. The camera lens captured the expansive living room of the Midtown penthouse. It was a stunning property, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a floating glass staircase, and panoramic views of the city. It was everything Darren felt he deserved without ever having to work a single day for it. I took a sip of my espresso and turned up the volume on my computer speakers. Darren walked into the frame holding a bottle of champagne. Right behind him was Sierra wearing another inappropriately short dress and squealing with delight as she spun around the empty living room. "Oh my God, Darren, it is perfect!" she practically screamed, running over to the massive windows. "The natural light in here is going to be amazing for my social media posts." Kevin strolled into the frame a moment later, looking like the ultimate stereotype of a sleazy real estate broker. He was wearing a cheap suit that he thought looked expensive, and he had a smug grin plastered across his face. He walked over to the kitchen island, leaning against it with an air of absolute superiority. "I told you, bro," Kevin said, pointing a finger at Darren. "I am the only broker in this city who could have rushed an underwriting process this fast. You are looking at pure real estate genius." The bank approved the second mortgage without a single question. Darren popped the cork on the champagne and poured 3 glasses. He handed one to Sierra and one to Kevin. "I owe you big time, man," Darren said, raising his glass. "This place is incredible. It is finally going to be my own space. No nagging, no corporate spreadsheets, no constant reminders of who pays the bills." Kevin laughed loudly, taking a generous sip of his drink. "Yeah, well, you earned it, man," he said, shaking his head. "Living with Renee has to be exhausting. The woman acts like she is royalty just because she climbed her way out of the bottom. She has all that money but zero class. She is just a bitter workaholic who does not know how to treat a real man. You need someone like Sierra who actually appreciates you." Sierra giggled and wrapped her arms around Darren's neck, kissing his cheek. "You are so good to me, Daddy," she cooed, burying her face in his neck. "Renee is just an angry old woman. She does not understand how to have fun or be soft for you." I sat in my ergonomic desk chair perfectly still. The espresso in my cup was warm, but my blood ran completely cold. I was paying for the very internet connection transmitting this video. I was paying for the suit Kevin was wearing. I had funded the entire foundation of their existence, and yet here they were standing in a multi-million-dollar property. They were trying to steal from me, calling me an angry old woman and a classless workhorse. They were bonding over their mutual hatred and exploitation of my success. It was a fascinating psychological study in pure, unadulterated parasitism. They walked around the penthouse planning where to put the custom furniture and the flat-screen televisions. Kevin kept bragging about his non-existent negotiation skills, taking full credit for a federal crime he was about to unknowingly execute. Darren played the role of the wealthy benefactor promising Sierra he would buy her whatever she wanted for the master bedroom. He was swiping my black card in his imagination before the funds had even cleared. Sierra walked out onto the private terrace and looked out over the city. She turned around and pouted her lips, putting her hands on her hips. "Darren, baby, this place is way too gorgeous to keep to ourselves," she said, her voice whining in that manufactured baby tone she used to manipulate him. "We have to show it off. I want a massive housewarming party. I want to invite all my friends and all the executives from the firm. I want everyone to see how successful you are." Darren puffed out his chest, standing a little taller at her words. Kevin nodded in agreement, egging him on. "She is right, bro," Kevin said. "You need to establish yourself. You need to show the city that you are a major player now, not just Renee's +1. Darren smiled a wide, arrogant grin that I had grown to completely despise. "A housewarming party in an empty penthouse is not good enough for you, baby," he told Sierra. "We are going to celebrate the closing properly. Tomorrow night, I am renting out the most expensive VIP lounge in the entire city. We will invite everyone, champagne caviar, the whole works. It will be the greatest night of our lives." I closed the laptop screen, cutting off the video feed. The silence of my office returned. Saturday night was going to be the greatest night of their lives indeed. They had planned their own public execution, and all I had to do was let the clock run out. Saturday morning arrived with a clear blue sky and the crisp air of absolute finality. Darren walked into the kitchen carrying a small leather duffel bag. He was wearing his casual weekend clothes, smelling of expensive cologne and misplaced confidence. He poured a cup of coffee and leaned against the marble counter, looking at me with his signature fake smile. "I have to head out for an overnight business trip," he lied smoothly, taking a sip of his coffee. "That client from the restaurant wants to do a weekend retreat to discuss the final details of his portfolio. I will be back tomorrow evening. I am sorry to leave you alone for the weekend, baby." I looked up from my tablet and gave him a soft, reassuring smile. "It is completely fine," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You go do what you have to do. I have plenty of things to take care of around the house anyway." He kissed my forehead, unaware that my words were a literal promise. He grabbed his keys and walked out. I watched his car pull out of the driveway. He was not going to a corporate retreat. He was driving straight to a luxury spa in the mountains for a romantic getaway with Sierra before their celebration dinner. He thought he was leaving me behind in his shadow. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I picked up my phone. I did not call a moving company. Moving companies are gentle and they care about protecting fragile items. I simply called a commercial demolition and cleanup crew. Less than an hour later, a large white box truck backed into my driveway. 5 men wearing heavy work boots and faded gray uniforms walked through my front door. The foreman, a tall man with a thick beard, asked me exactly what needed to be cleared out. I pointed toward the grand staircase. "Everything in the master bedroom closet on the left side, and everything in the home office," I instructed. "Do not fold anything. Do not wrap anything. Just put it all in the cheapest cardboard boxes you have and leave the boxes out on the front lawn." The men went straight to work. I watched the systematic dismantling of Darren's funded existence. They grabbed armfuls of custom Italian suits and shoved them into rough brown boxes. His silk ties were tangled together like cheap yarn. His imported leather shoes were tossed carelessly into the cardboard bins. I walked into his office and opened the safe using the combination I already knew. I took out the velvet boxes containing the expensive watches I had bought him over the years. I walked outside and dropped them into a box filled with his golf cleats and gym clothes. He had worn those watches to impress a girl young enough to be his daughter. They were absolutely nothing but trash to me right now. It took the crew exactly 2 hours to strip away 4 years of his life. My mansion felt lighter. The heavy, suffocating presence of his entitlement was being carried out the front door box by box. The crew dragged the heavy cardboard bins across the manicured grass and stacked them in an untidy pile near the main gate. It looked exactly like just what it was: mere garbage waiting for collection. I paid the foreman in cash and thanked them for their efficiency. As the white truck pulled out of the driveway, 3 matte black SUV vehicles immediately pulled right in, taking its place. The doors opened, and several men in dark tactical uniforms stepped out. They were the armed security detail sent by David the tech billionaire who now legally owned my former home. The lead officer walked up to the front porch holding a clipboard. "Good morning, Mom," he said respectfully. "Mr. David sent us to secure the perimeter and assume control of the property." I nodded and stepped aside. "Please proceed," I said. The security team moved with incredible precision. They immediately disabled the smart home network, erasing Darren's access codes from the main gate and the front door. They brought in a locksmith who physically changed every single deadbolt lock on the property in a matter of minutes. I stood on the front porch holding a single piece of paper. It was a formal notice of trespassing written and signed by David's legal team. I walked down the long driveway, the morning sun warming my face. I reached the pile of cheap cardboard boxes and taped the paper notice securely to the gate directly above Darren's ruined belongings. The mansion was completely locked down. Armed guards stood at the entrance. The locks were changed and the gates were electronically sealed. The trap was fully armed. But before I could stand on that porch and watch the armed guards secure the gates, I have to take you back to what happened just 1 hour earlier. The white box truck from the demolition crew had not yet arrived. The house was still quiet, and I was sitting in my office reviewing the final trust fund transfers. Suddenly, I heard the heavy wooden front door swing open. Darren was supposed to be halfway to the mountain spa with his young mistress. Instead, I heard his footsteps echoing in the foyer, followed by a second set of heavier, unfamiliar footsteps. I quietly closed my laptop and walked out into the hallway. Darren was standing in the living room, wearing the same casual weekend clothes, but his face was tight with nervous energy. Standing right next to him was a tall, older white man with graying hair carrying a worn leather medical bag. He looked disheveled, like a man who had lost his practice and was desperate for cash. I immediately knew exactly who this was. This was the corrupt doctor Kevin had bragged about on the hidden audio recording. "Dr. Evans," Renee Baby Darren said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I turned my car around because I have just been so worried about you lately. You have been acting so distant and erratic. You are working yourself into a mental breakdown, and I cannot just leave you alone for the weekend. This is Dr. Evans. He is a private physician and a friend of Kevin's. He is just here to give you a quick evaluation and maybe something to help you calm down and rest." Dr. Evans stepped forward, putting on a patronizing smile. He opened his leather bag and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle, along with a pre-filled syringe. "Hello, Renee," he said in a slow, soothing voice like he was speaking to a toddler. "Your husband tells me you have been under an immense amount of corporate stress. We are seeing some classic signs of severe bipolar mania. I am just going to give you a mild sedative to help you sleep. It will make you feel so much better, and then we can discuss a temporary medical power of attorney, so Darren can handle your business affairs while you recover." I stood at the bottom of the grand staircase looking at the two men. They had actually done it. They had brought a corrupt medical professional into my home to drug me and legally steal my entire life. Darren stood there trying to look like a grieving, concerned husband, but his eyes were darting nervously around the room. He wanted my signature, and he was willing to put me in a chemical straitjacket to get it. Most women would have screamed. They would have tried to run out the front door or called the police in a sheer panic. But panic is exactly what they wanted. Panic would only prove their fabricated diagnosis of hysteria. I did not raise my voice. I did not take a single step backward. I reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application, flipped it to video mode, and hit the red record button. I held the phone steady, pointing it directly at the doctor's face. "My name is Renee," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the large living room. "The date is Saturday and the time is 10 in the morning. I am standing in my home being confronted by my husband Darren and an unlicensed intruder who has just threatened to forcibly inject me with an unknown substance." Dr. Evans stopped walking, his fake smile instantly vanishing. "Put the phone down, Renee," he commanded nervously. "You are exhibiting paranoid delusions." I kept the camera locked on him. "You are Dr. Robert Evans," I stated calmly without breaking eye contact. "Your medical license number is 482910. You operate a failing private clinic in Midtown. You currently owe over $200,000 in back taxes, and you have 2 pending malpractice lawsuits. You are here because a mediocre real estate broker named Kevin offered you a cut of a fraudulent second mortgage in exchange for falsifying my medical records and declaring me mentally incompetent." Dr. Evans turned completely pale. The syringe in his hand began to shake. Darren took a step back, his mouth falling open in sheer terror. He looked at me like he was staring at a ghost. I took one slow, deliberate step toward the doctor. "If you take one more step toward me," I continued, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "I will upload this video directly to the State Medical Board and the Atlanta Field Office of the FBI. I have already spoken with Special Agent Marcus. They are fully aware of the wire fraud conspiracy you and Kevin have planned. If you do not walk out of my house in the next 5 seconds, you will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison cell for medical identity theft and attempted assault." The doctor looked at Darren with absolute panic in his eyes. "You told me she was crazy," he hissed at my husband. "You did not tell me she knew everything. You and Kevin are completely on your own. I want nothing to do with this." Dr. Evans dropped the prescription bottle on the hardwood floor, shoved his medical bag under his arm, and sprinted out the front door as fast as his legs could carry him. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Darren completely alone in the hallway with the woman he had tried to destroy. Darren was practically hyperventilating. He looked at the door and then back at me. "Renee, please," he stammered, taking a step back. "I can explain. Kevin told me to do it. I swear it was all Kevin's idea." I stopped recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Get out," I said quietly. "Go to your spa weekend, Darren. Go celebrate. Because if you stay in this house for one more minute, I will have you arrested for trespassing." He did not say another word. He turned around and ran out the door, tripping over his own feet in his rush to escape. He drove away like a coward, completely terrified of what I was going to do next. Exactly 10 minutes after he fled, the white box truck from the demolition crew arrived to throw his designer clothes onto the lawn, and an hour later, David's armed guards secured the gates. I knew Darren was panicking in his car right now. I opened the hidden audio application on my laptop and tuned into his vehicle feed. The audio crackled to life. He was breathing heavily, driving recklessly down the highway while calling Kevin. Kevin picked up on the first ring. "Bro, what happened?" Kevin asked. "Did Evans get the signature?" "She knows everything," Darren yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She recorded Evans. She knew his license number. She knew about the mortgage, Kevin. We have to cancel the deal right now." Kevin let out a loud, arrogant laugh over the phone. "Calm down, you idiot," Kevin said, his voice full of smug confidence. "She is just trying to scare you. She cannot stop anything now. The bank underwriter just emailed me 10 minutes ago. The second mortgage is fully approved. The funds are locked in, and the $2.5 million drops directly into the escrow account first thing Monday morning. But she recorded us, Darren pleaded. Let her record whatever she wants, Kevin sneered. By the time she tries to hire a lawyer to fight it, the money will already be cleared and we will be closing on the penthouse. The crazy bitch cannot stop us now. Just go to the spa, get Sierra ready for tonight, and show up at the restaurant. We are celebrating. The call ended. I sat in my empty house and smiled. Kevin was absolutely right about one thing. The money was dropping on Monday, but he had no idea whose account it was actually dropping into. I remained in my home office for a few more minutes after listening to the panicked phone call between Darren and Kevin. My bags were already packed and sitting by the front door. The timeline of my revenge was accelerating perfectly, and I needed to make sure every single piece was in its proper place before I crossed the Atlantic. My phone buzzed on the smooth mahogany desk. The screen lit up with Darren's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up, keeping my voice calm, flat, and slightly distracted. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice thick with a fake soothing tone. He was likely sitting in a plush white bathrobe at the luxury mountain spa, with Sierra lounging right next to him. He apologized again for the massive misunderstanding with Dr. Evans that morning, claiming he was just so worried about my mental health that he let Kevin convince him to bring a professional to the house. He played the part of the grieving, concerned husband, asking if I was going to be okay alone at the mansion for the rest of the weekend. He had no idea that the mansion was no longer mine and that his belongings were currently sitting on the front lawn, guarded by men with assault rifles. I told him not to worry about me. I explained that a massive public relations crisis had just exploded with one of my major international luxury clients. I told him I had to fly out to Paris immediately to handle the corporate fallout in person. I could practically hear the massive sigh of relief escaping his lungs over the phone line. He thought the coast was completely clear. "Oh wow, baby, that is terrible, but I know you will handle it," he said, his voice suddenly much lighter. "You are a powerhouse. Do you need me to leave the retreat and come home to take you to the airport?" Of course he did not want to come home. He was absolutely terrified of me after the stunt with the hidden camera and the medical license. I told him my private car was already waiting outside. He told me to have a safe flight and that he would see me on Monday when he got back from his trip. We hung up the phone. He was probably popping a bottle of champagne at the spa, right at that very second, celebrating the fact that his wealthy, crazy wife was leaving the continent. He thought the house would be waiting for him. He thought the $2.5 million would be waiting for him. He thought he had won. I walked out of my office and took one last look around the grand foyer. The house was completely empty of his toxic presence. The armed guards were stationed silently outside the heavy glass windows. David's security team was in full control. I walked out the front door, the warm Atlanta breeze hitting my face, and handed my keys to the lead security officer. My chauffeured black SUV drove me safely to the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson. The Atlanta traffic was a blur of bright red taillights and dull gray concrete, but I felt lighter than I had in 4 years. There would be no more paying for his extravagant lifestyle. There would be no more carrying the dead weight of a mediocre man who deeply resented the very shoulders he stood on to look tall. I bypassed the regular security lines and walked straight into the private Delta Sky Club lounge. The environment was quiet and smelled of rich coffee and expensive leather. I ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime and opened my laptop to check the final account balances. The irrevocable trust was fully funded and locked. The offshore banking account securely held the $5 million from the cash sale of the mansion. My personal checking accounts were secured. The only loose financial thread left in the entire world was the titanium supplementary black card currently sitting in Darren's leather wallet. A soft voice came over the intercom calling the boarding for the first-class cabin to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. I gathered my designer tote bag and walked down the long jet bridge. The flight attendant greeted me warmly by my first name and handed me a steaming hot towel and a tall glass of vintage champagne the moment I sat down. I settled into my private pod, adjusting the plush leather seat and stretching my legs out. Women like me are always taught to be grateful when a man simply decides to stay. Society conditions us to accept the absolute bare minimum and call it loyalty. Darren truly thought my wealth was a shared marital asset, but he believed my intelligence was a flaw he had to actively manage and suppress. Kevin thought my blackness made me naturally gullible and overly emotional. They both thought they could orchestrate my financial and psychological downfall while actively spending my money to fund it. But they completely forgot that a woman who knows how to build an empire from scratch also knows exactly how to demolish a building down to its foundation. The massive plane began to taxi slowly down the runway. The jet engines roared loudly, pushing my body back into the soft leather seat. Outside the thick window, the Atlanta skyline grew smaller and smaller until it was just a tiny cluster of toy blocks in the far distance. Darren was back down there somewhere, putting on his tailored suit, the very suit that my hard work paid for, getting ready to walk into the most exclusive dining room in the city. He was preparing to act like a king, holding court with his beautiful young intern and his arrogant enablers. I opened my designer wallet and pulled out my primary American Express black card. The heavy dark metal felt incredibly cool and powerful against my fingers. I looked at the digital clock on my phone screen. It was currently 4 in the afternoon on the East Coast. Darren's expensive Victory dinner reservation was set for 7:30. He would be ordering the absolute most expensive items on the menu. He would demand the imported caviar and the oldest vintage champagne they had in the cellar. He would be making his loud, arrogant toasts to his naive little fiancée and his racist brother-in-law feeling completely untouchable. And then right after dessert, the waiter would bring the final check. I traced the raised numbers on the front of the credit card. I had explicitly instructed William at the concierge desk to initiate the shadow rule exactly as planned. The hard lock on his account would execute precisely at 8 in the evening. There would be no automated warning text messages. There would be no courtesy calls from the fraud department asking for verification. There would just be a sudden, absolute, and catastrophic financial flatline. I smiled to myself and put the heavy metal card back into my wallet, slipping my phone into airplane mode. The countdown to 8 o'clock had officially begun, and Darren had absolutely no idea that his entire fake life was about to violently expire while I was soaring 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, sipping my vintage champagne and watching a classic movie. Darren was walking into the most exclusive dining room in downtown Atlanta. The clock on the restaurant wall showed exactly 7:30 in the evening. The Michelin star restaurant was famous for its opulence. It featured crystal chandeliers, imported marble floors, and a waitstaff trained to anticipate every single whim of the ultra-wealthy. Darren walked through the grand entrance with his head held high, acting like he owned the entire building. Sierra was clinging tightly to his arm, wearing a dress covered in silver sequins that caught the light of the chandeliers. Right behind them walked Kevin and Valerie, looking incredibly smug and self-satisfied. The hostess led them to a private dining room tucked away behind heavy velvet curtains. Darren had reserved the best table in the house. The table was covered in crisp white linen and set with fine silver and delicate crystal glasses. Darren pulled out a chair for Sierra, playing the role of the ultimate gentleman. The waiter handed them menus bound in soft black leather, but Darren waved his hand dismissively. He did not need to look at the prices because he believed my money was an endless river flowing directly into his pockets. "Bring us the beluga caviar to start," Darren commanded, his voice loud enough for the staff to hear his manufactured confidence. "And we will take 2 bottles of the Dom Perignon, the vintage rose. Keep them coming throughout the night. We are celebrating a massive real estate acquisition." The waiter bowed slightly and scurried off to fetch the items. The 4 of them sat around the table, basking in the glow of their stolen victory. Kevin leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket and smirking at Darren. Valerie was already taking selfies with Sierra, holding up her empty crystal glass and pouting her lips for the camera. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that their entire world was currently sitting in cheap cardboard boxes on a lawn guarded by armed men. The champagne arrived resting in heavy silver ice buckets. The waiter popped the corks with a soft sigh and poured the sparkling pink liquid into their glasses. At $2,000 a bottle, Darren was literally drinking the money I had spent years earning through sleepless nights and relentless corporate battles. But he did not care. He raised his glass and looked around the table. "To my beautiful fiancée Sierra Darren," said his voice dripping with arrogance. "And to the brand new penthouse in Midtown. The closing is on Monday, and our new life begins." They all clapped and cheered, clinking their glasses together. The caviar arrived, followed by plates of perfectly seared Japanese Wagyu beef, shaved white truffles, and butter-poached lobster. They ate like royalty, laughing loudly and making crude jokes. Darren ordered another 2 bottles of the vintage champagne. The bill was skyrocketing with every passing minute, but Darren just kept ordering. He wanted to show Kevin that he was a real man playing in the big leagues. As they finished their main courses, the clock on the wall ticked closer to 8 in the evening. The restaurant was buzzing with the low murmur of wealthy patrons, but inside the private dining room, the conversation took a dark and ugly turn. Kevin poured himself another glass of champagne and stood up, tapping his silver fork against the crystal to demand their attention. "I want to make a toast," Kevin announced, his voice booming in the small room. He looked directly at Darren, his pale face flushed from the alcohol. "I want to toast to a man who finally took his life back. Darren, we all know what you have been dealing with for the last 4 years. You have been chained to a woman who thought her paycheck made her the boss." Valerie nodded aggressively, taking a sip of her wine. "Exactly," she chimed in. "Renee is always so controlling." Kevin held up his hand to stop her so he could continue his racist monologue. "Let us be honest here." Kevin sneered, his true colors shining brightly under the crystal chandelier. "These successful black women like Renee, they get a little bit of money and they suddenly think they are superior to everyone else. They lose their femininity. They become loud, dominating, and impossible to live with. They want to emasculate their men just to prove a point. They bring their ghetto attitude into the corporate world and expect us to just bow down." Darren did not defend me. The man whose mother I had saved from bankruptcy, the man whose clothes and cars and meals I had paid for, simply sat there and nodded in agreement. "But you beat her," Kevin continued, raising his glass higher. "You played the game perfectly, bro. You used her resources, you secured the bag, and now you are stepping into your true power as a man. You are shedding that dead weight and upgrading to a woman who actually knows how to treat you like a king. To men taking back their freedom and leaving the angry black women behind." They all raised their glasses and drank to my supposed downfall. Sierra giggled and kissed Darren's cheek, telling him how strong and smart he was. Darren puffed out his chest, completely intoxicated by the praise and the expensive wine. He felt invincible. He felt like a mastermind who had successfully conned the system. The clock struck 8. While they were busy laughing and wiping truffle butter from their mouths, an invisible digital command executed itself inside the massive servers of the American Express banking system. Thousands of miles away, a simple line of code was triggered. The supplementary black card account ending in 402 was permanently locked. The account was completely wiped from the active ledger. The financial life support was officially disconnected. Darren leaned back in his chair, completely unaware that he was now financially dead. He snapped his fingers to get the waiter's attention. "Bring us the dessert menu," he ordered loudly, "and bring the check while you are at it. We have a VIP lounge waiting for us downtown, and I want to get this squared away." The waiter nodded and left the room. The 4 of them continued talking about the furniture they were going to buy for the penthouse and the massive housewarming party they were going to throw. Darren promised Valerie she could have her own key to the Midtown property. Kevin bragged about how he was going to use this deal to boost his real estate portfolio. 5 minutes passed. then 10 minutes. The desserts had not arrived. The laughing slowly began to die down as they realized the service had suddenly stopped. Darren checked his expensive watch. The one he did not know was currently sitting in a cardboard box on the lawn, and frowned. "What is taking them so long?" he muttered, visibly annoyed that his grand performance was being interrupted. The heavy velvet curtains of the private dining room were suddenly pulled back. It was not the waiter who entered. It was the general manager of the restaurant. He was a tall, distinguished man wearing an immaculate tailored suit. He held a black leather folder resting on a small silver tray. His posture was incredibly stiff, and his expression was completely devoid of the warm hospitality they had received when they first walked in. He walked directly over to Darren. The room went dead silent. The manager did not offer a dessert menu. He placed the black leather folder on the white tablecloth right in front of my husband. The manager forced a very tight, highly professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "Your bill, sir." The manager said, his voice clipped and cold. "The total comes to $40,250. Darren let out a loud, arrogant laugh, completely unbothered by the massive number. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out his leather wallet, confident that he was about to impress his young mistress and shut his arrogant brother-in-law up once and for all. Darren pulled the heavy titanium American Express black card from his leather wallet and tossed it onto the small silver tray with a loud clink. He did not even glance at the itemized receipt. He just leaned back in his chair and draped his arm around Sierra's bare shoulder, grinning at Kevin. $40,000 is just the cost of doing business," he bragged loudly. "When you operate at my level, you do not look at the price tags, you just look at the return on investment." Sierra giggled and kissed his cheek, whispering about how generous and powerful he was. Valerie smiled proudly at her brother, taking another sip of the $2,000 champagne. But the general manager did not mirror their celebratory mood. His face remained completely carved from stone. He did not walk away with the tray. Instead, he pulled a sleek black mobile payment terminal from the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. "We will process this right here at the table, sir," the manager said, his voice perfectly flat. Darren waved his hand dismissively, telling the man to go ahead and run it. The manager inserted the heavy metal card into the terminal. The machine processed for a few seconds. The small screen glowed brightly in the dim private room. Then a sharp, high-pitched beep echoed over the table. A bright red light flashed on the top of the terminal. The manager looked down at the screen and then back up at Darren. "I am sorry, sir, but this card has been declined," he said loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. Darren's smug smile froze instantly. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. Kevin stopped swirling his wine glass and Valerie lowered her phone. Sierra looked confused, glancing between Darren's flushed face and the unblinking restaurant manager. "Declined," Darren repeated, letting out a nervous, forced chuckle. "That is impossible. It is an unlimited black card. There is no preset spending limit. Your machine must be broken. Run the chip again." The manager did not argue. He pulled the card out, wiped the metal chip with a white cloth and inserted it back into the terminal. The group sat in absolute silence, watching the small digital screen processing the transaction. The tension in the room grew suffocating. Another sharp beep pierced the air, followed by the same glowing red light. "Declined again, sir?" The manager stated, his tone growing colder and far less polite. "The terminal specifies a code that indicates the account is invalid. Do you have another form of payment?" Darren's face turned a deep shade of crimson. The humiliation was instantly visible on his skin. He could feel Kevin staring at him, and he could feel Sierra's body physically pulling away from his arm. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his facade of wealth and control. "It must be a security glitch," Valerie whispered loudly, leaning across the table. "You know how these banks are when you make a large purchase out of nowhere? They probably just flagged it for fraud protection. Just call your private banker, Darren." "Yes, a security flag?" Darren agreed eagerly, latching onto his sister's excuse. He pulled his phone out of his pocket with shaking hands. "Just give me 1 minute," he told the manager with false authority. "I will have the concierge desk clear this up right now. They are always overly protective with my account." Darren dialed the exclusive customer service number on the back of the card. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the white tablecloth so everyone could hear him assert his dominance over the bank. The phone rang once before an automated voice prompted him to enter his account number. He typed it in quickly. A few seconds later, a live representative answered the call. "American Express, Platinum and Black Card Services. My name is Julia. How can I assist you tonight?" the crisp voice asked through the speaker. "Julia, this is Darren," he said using his most demanding corporate tone. "I am currently sitting at a restaurant and my black card was just declined for a $40,000 charge. I need you to lift the fraud alert immediately and authorize the transaction." There was a brief pause on the line followed by the sound of rapid typing. Darren looked around the table, giving Kevin a reassuring nod as if everything was perfectly under control. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir," the representative said. "Please allow me 1 moment to pull up the account details for the card ending in 402. The table waited in agonizing silence. Sierra nervously picked at her napkin. Kevin crossed his arms, looking increasingly annoyed that the celebration was being ruined by an embarrassing administrative error. "Sir," the representative finally spoke again, but her tone had shifted completely. "I am looking at the system right now, and I am afraid I cannot process any authorizations for this card." "What do you mean you cannot authorize it?" Darren snapped, his voice rising in panic. "It is a supplementary card attached to my wife's primary account. Check the main account under Renee. There are millions of dollars in liquid assets attached to that profile." "I understand, sir," the representative replied, her voice remaining incredibly polite but firm. "However, as a supplementary cardholder, you do not have the legal authorization to access or inquire about the primary account details. Furthermore, the specific supplementary card you are holding has been permanently purged from our active ledger by the primary account holder." "What are you talking about?" Darren demanded, his face now completely pale. "The account no longer exists, sir," the representative stated clearly. "The card was permanently closed and deleted from our system exactly 23 minutes ago. There is no fraud alert to lift. The line of credit has been terminated. If you have any further questions, you will need to contact the primary account holder directly. Have a good evening." The call disconnected, leaving a hollow dial tone echoing in the quiet dining room. Darren stared at the black screen of his phone, his jaw hanging open. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Renee had not gone to Paris for a public relations crisis. She had not believed his lies about the corrupt doctor. She knew everything, and she had just cut his financial throat in front of his mistress and his family. Sierra covered her face with her hands, looking absolutely mortified. People at the tables outside the velvet curtains were beginning to stare. "I need a valid form of payment right now," the restaurant manager demanded, dropping all pretenses of customer service. $40,000 is not a minor misunderstanding. It is grand larceny. If you cannot produce a working credit card immediately, I will have no choice but to lock the doors and call the Atlanta Police Department." Darren patted his pockets frantically, pulling out his wallet. He had a few personal debit cards, but they only had a couple $100s on them. He had absolutely nothing that could cover a bill of this magnitude. He looked at Valerie, who immediately looked away, pretending to check her purse. He looked at Sierra, who was already scooting her chair away from him. He was completely trapped. The king of the castle had just been exposed as a broke fraud in front of his entire court. Kevin let out a loud, heavy sigh that cut through the panic. He uncrossed his arms and shook his head, looking at Darren with utter disgust. "This is exactly why you cannot rely on a woman to fund your life," Kevin muttered, reaching into his own designer jacket. He pulled out a thick, silver credit card. "Step aside, Darren, and let a real man handle the grown-up business." Kevin tossed his platinum corporate card onto the silver tray with a smug, self-righteous smirk. "Charge it to my brokerage firm," he told the manager confidently. The manager picked up the silver card and inserted it into the glowing terminal. The trap was about to claim its second victim. The manager pushed the heavy silver card into the slot of the mobile terminal. Kevin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and looking at Darren with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Kevin believed he was the untouchable white knight of the family, the successful real estate broker who was immune to the financial struggles of the people around him. He was ready to play the savior and hold this massive debt over Darren's head for the rest of his life. The small screen on the terminal flashed processing. The entire table held their breath. The silence in the private dining room was broken by a sharp, high-pitched beep. The same bright red light illuminated the top of the machine. "Decline," the manager said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Kevin's smug smile vanished instantly. His arms dropped to his sides and he sat forward in his chair. "That is impossible." He snapped his face, turning a blotchy shade of red. "That is a corporate platinum account tied directly to my brokerage firm. There are millions of dollars in liquid assets backing that card. Your machine is clearly malfunctioning. Run it again and push it through manually." The manager did not argue. He pulled the silver card out, wiped it on his cloth, and inserted it back into the bottom of the terminal. The group watched the screen like it was a ticking time bomb. Another sharp beep pierced the quiet room. The red light flashed again. "Declined." The manager repeated, his tone growing dangerously thin. "The error code specifies that the issuing bank has completely frozen the account associated with this card." Kevin looked like he had just been slapped across the face. Valerie gasped, putting her hand over her mouth. Darren just stared at his brother-in-law, his own humiliation suddenly overshadowed by Kevin's unexpected failure. Sierra sank lower into her chair, looking like she wanted to disappear into the velvet upholstery. "This is ridiculous," Kevin muttered, his hands shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. He was sweating now, the heavy arrogance melting off him completely. "I am calling my executive assistant right now. He monitors the corporate accounts 24/7. Someone is getting fired over this, I promise you." Kevin dialed the number and put the phone to his ear. He paced the length of the small dining room, trying to look authoritative, but looking more like a trapped animal. The phone rang 3 times before his assistant answered. The dining room was so quiet that the frantic voice of his assistant echoed clearly from the earpiece. "Kevin, thank God you are calling." The assistant yelled, his voice completely hysterical. "I have been trying to reach you for 2 hours, but your phone went straight to voicemail." "What is going on with the corporate cards?" Kevin demanded, trying to keep his voice low and threatening. "I am at a restaurant, and my platinum card was just declined for a major business expense. Fix it immediately before I lose my temper." "I cannot fix it," the assistant cried over the phone. "Everything is gone, Kevin. The FBI raided the downtown office 2 hours ago. They brought boxes and seized all the hard drives and physical files. The federal government has officially frozen every single bank account tied to the brokerage firm." Kevin's face lost all its color, turning a sickening shade of pale gray. He stopped pacing and stood perfectly still in the middle of the room. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He felt the luxurious walls of his fake life closing in on him. "What do you mean raided?" Kevin finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling. "On what charges are they acting?" "Wire fraud and conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud." The assistant practically sobbed. "They had a federal warrant, Kevin. They said you submitted a fraudulent second mortgage application on a property in Buckhead using forged signatures. They also mentioned something about medical identity theft and a corrupt doctor named Evans. The state real estate commission was with them. Your broker's license has been suspended indefinitely. You have absolutely nothing left, Kevin. You need to hire a criminal defense attorney right now." The phone slipped from Kevin's hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The screen cracked, but the assistant kept yelling his name through the speaker until the line finally went dead. Kevin stared blankly at the wall. The pieces were rapidly connecting in his mind. Renee had not just canceled Darren's black card. She had orchestrated a massive federal sting operation. She knew about the forged signatures on the loan application. She knew about Dr. Evans coming to the house. She had gathered all the evidence and handed it directly to the FBI while he was busy bragging and drinking expensive champagne. The $2.5 million penthouse deal was never going to close. It was just the bait to trap him in a federal crime. Darren looked at Kevin, his eyes wide with sheer terror. What did he mean? Wire fraud? Darren asked, his voice cracking. Kevin, tell me what is going on. We are going to federal prison, Kevin whispered, staring down at his empty hands. She set us up. She set the whole thing up and we walked right into it like complete idiots. The restaurant manager cleared his throat loudly, breaking the heavy silence. I do not care about your personal legal issues, the manager said, his patience entirely exhausted. I care about the $40,000 you owe this establishment. Since neither of you can produce a valid payment method, I am contacting the authorities immediately. The manager turned around and pulled the heavy velvet curtains open to leave the private dining room, but he stopped dead in his tracks. Standing right outside the private room in the main dining area were two uniformed Atlanta police officers and a tall man wearing a dark tailored suit. The man in the suit reached into his jacket and pulled out a gold badge. He was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the exact same agent I had called from my home gym. Special Agent Marcus. The restaurant manager let out a sigh of relief, pointing toward Darren and Kevin. Officers, I am so glad you are here, the manager said quickly. These men just racked up a $40,000 bill and their cards are declining. They are attempting to defraud the restaurant and refuse to pay. Special Agent Marcus stepped past the manager and walked directly into the private dining room. He did not even look at the expensive champagne or the half-eaten caviar on the table. His eyes locked onto Kevin, who was now leaning heavily against the wall, looking completely broken. We are not here for the unpaid restaurant bill, Agent Marcus said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying authority. The two uniformed officers stepped into the room, unfastening the handcuffs from their belts. Valerie let out a piercing scream, backing away from the table. Sierra jumped up from her chair and retreated into the corner of the room, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Darren stood frozen to the floor, too terrified to even breathe or speak. Agent Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and held it up for Kevin to see. Kevin, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and identity theft, Marcus announced, reading the charges clearly in front of the entire restaurant. Put your hands behind your back. The heavy metal handcuffs clicked shut around Kevin's wrists with a sharp and terrifying finality. Valerie let out another piercing shriek, grabbing the sleeve of Agent Marcus, but one of the uniformed officers firmly stepped between them. Kevin, the arrogant white broker who just minutes ago was toasting to my downfall and insulting my blackness, was now being forcefully marched out of the private dining room. His face was completely drained of blood, and his platinum corporate card remained forgotten on the small silver tray. The other diners in the restaurant had completely stopped eating their expensive meals to watch the spectacle of a wealthy man being paraded through the room in chains. In the midst of this absolute chaos, Darren realized his own life was collapsing in real time. He knew his name was on that fraudulent second mortgage application. He knew the FBI had raided Kevin's office and seized the files. He was completely paralyzed by fear, but as the police dragged Kevin out, the restaurant manager stepped right back into Darren's line of sight. The FBI agent might have ignored the unpaid bill, but the manager certainly had not. The manager crossed his arms and stared at Darren, waiting for the $40,000. Darren panicked. He mumbled a pathetic excuse about needing to use the restroom to call his bank, and he practically sprinted away from the table, leaving a sobbing Valerie and a terrified Sierra behind. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the men's restroom and locked himself inside the handicap stall. The luxurious marble walls offered no comfort. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his tailored suit jacket. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He needed money and he needed a lawyer. But most importantly, he needed me. The very woman he had called a classless workaholic, The woman he was trying to rob was now his only hope for survival. He dialed my number. It rang and rang before dropping to voicemail. He dialed again. He paced the small space of the bathroom stall, pressing the phone against his ear. "Renee, please pick up," he pleaded into the voicemail, his voice cracking with desperation. "Kevin just got arrested. The FBI was here. My black card is not working and the restaurant is threatening to call the police on me, too. Baby, I need you. Please call me back right now." He hung up and called again. He called 10 times. He called 20 times. He sent frantic text messages begging for forgiveness, swearing that the penthouse was just a real estate investment and that Sierra was just an intern helping with the paperwork. He lied and he pleaded and he cried. He called a total of 63 times in less than 15 minutes, entirely consumed by the terrifying reality that his safety net had been completely severed. Thousands of miles away, I was completely at peace. The cabin of the first-class section was dark and silent, except for the low hum of the jet engines. I was wrapped in a plush blanket, sipping my vintage Bordeaux and watching a classic film on the personal screen. I decided to purchase the in-flight internet access, just to check the status of the trust fund transfers one last time. The moment my phone connected to the satellite network, the screen lit up like a fireworks display. A massive wall of notifications flooded my locked screen. Darren, 63, missed calls. Darren, 14, new voicemails. Valerie, 7, missed calls. The frantic text messages scrolled rapidly across the display. "Renee, help us. Renee, Kevin is in jail. Renee, my card is dead. Renee, please answer." I did not open a single text message. I did not listen to a single desperate voicemail. I simply held the glass of wine in my hand and stared at the screen, watching his panic manifest in digital form. He was drowning in the exact deep water he had dug for me. I took a slow sip of my wine, tasting the rich, complex notes of the Bordeaux. It tasted like absolute victory. I smiled softly, pressed my thumb against the power button, and watched the screen completely fade to black. I set the phone aside and went back to watching my movie completely undisturbed by the destruction of the man who tried to break me. Back in Atlanta, Darren finally realized that I was not going to answer. The battery on his phone was dying, and he could not hide in the marble bathroom forever. He wiped his face, adjusted his tie, and slowly walked back out into the main dining area. The police were gone. Kevin was gone. Valerie had fled the restaurant in a state of absolute shock, leaving her brother to face the consequences alone. Sierra was standing near the front entrance, holding her designer clutch, looking completely embarrassed and detached. She was not looking at Darren with admiration anymore. She was looking at him like he was a pathetic stranger. The general manager was waiting for him near the hostess stand, flanked by 2 massive security guards. The manager held out the black leather folder containing the massive bill. "My wife is on an international flight." Darren stammered, his voice weak and completely stripped of its former arrogance. "I cannot reach her to authorize the funds. I just need a little bit of time to get the money together to pay for the dinner." "This is not a bank, sir." The manager said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "You consumed $40,000 worth of our product. If you cannot pay this second, I am calling the police, and you will be joining your friend in a jail cell tonight." Darren looked around the restaurant. The wealthy patrons were staring at him, whispering to each other. He had completely lost his dignity. He looked at the manager, and then looked down at his own wrist. Wrapped around his wrist was a custom solid gold Rolex watch. It was the watch I had purchased for his 30th birthday. It cost exactly $45,000. It was his most prized possession, and the ultimate symbol of the fake wealth he liked to flaunt. Darren slowly unclasped the heavy gold watch and handed it over to the manager. His hands were trembling as he surrendered his prized possession. The cold metal slipped from his fingers, entirely symbolizing the loss of the life he never truly earned. "I will hold this as collateral," the manager said, inspecting the timepiece carefully under the chandelier's light. You have exactly 48 hours to return with a valid form of payment to settle your account. If you do not, this watch becomes the property of the restaurant, and we will still file formal charges against you for theft of services. Darren nodded silently, thoroughly humiliated. He turned away from the manager and walked toward the front doors. He did not look at any of the other diners. He reached out to grab Sierra's hand, hoping for some form of comfort, but she quickly pulled away, stepping out of his reach. She walked out of the restaurant ahead of him, her head held high, acting like she had never even met him. Darren followed her out into the warm Atlanta night, a completely broken man stripped of his money, his pride, and his illusion of power. Darren stumbled into the humid Atlanta night air, the heavy doors of the restaurant closing behind him. Sierra was standing on the corner, furiously tapping on her phone, while Valerie paced back and forth on the sidewalk, looking over her shoulder as if the FBI was going to jump out of the bushes and arrest her too. Darren approached them, his head spinning and his stomach turning into tight knots. He had just lost his solid gold Rolex watch, the $40,000 dinner, the unlimited black card, and his entire pride. But he still thought he had one ultimate safety net left to fall back on. He still thought he had my $5 million house. Look, Darren said, his voice trembling as he tried to regain some semblance of authority. We just need to go back to the house right now. Renee is on a flight to Paris, so the place is completely empty for the weekend. My heavy steel safe is in the office. I have thousands of dollars in emergency cash in there. I have designer watches, gold cufflinks, and expensive artwork we can easily pawn first thing tomorrow morning to pay off the restaurant manager and hire a criminal defense lawyer for Kevin. We just need to get back to Buckhead. Valerie nodded, frantically desperate for any kind of solution that involved my money saving their family once again. Sierra did not say a word, but she reluctantly followed them to the luxury sedan I had leased for him. The drive to the Buckhead mansion was suffocatingly silent. Darren gripped the leather steering wheel with sweaty hands, running red lights and speeding down the dark, empty streets. He was rapidly calculating the value of the items inside my house. He figured he could grab my diamond jewelry, my exclusive designer bags, and his expensive shoes. He thought he could strip the house bare and liquidate my assets before my flight even landed in France. He truly believed he was still the king of the castle, just experiencing a minor temporary setback orchestrated by an angry wife. They turned onto the exclusive tree-lined street and approached the massive wrought iron gates of the estate. Darren rolled down his window and punched his custom access code into the glowing digital keypad. The machine let out a harsh, flat buzz. A small red light flashed on the screen displaying access denied. Darren frowned and pressed the heavy buttons harder. He tried his personal code again. He tried my birthday. He tried our wedding anniversary. Every single combination was met with the exact same angry red light and the flat, rejecting buzz. What is wrong with the gate? Valerie whined, stepping out of the passenger side to look at the keypad. Just open it, Darren. We need to get inside before someone sees us out here looking like criminals. Darren slammed his hand against the steering wheel and threw the car into park. He got out and walked up to the heavy metal gates, grabbing the cold iron bars and shaking them violently. That was when he looked past the gates and saw the front lawn. The bright security floodlights illuminated the manicured grass, casting long shadows over a massive pile of cheap brown cardboard boxes. Darren froze, completely solid. His breath caught in his throat. Valerie walked up beside him and gasped loudly, pressing her hands against her face in horror. Sierra slowly stepped out of the back seat, her high heels clicking softly on the dark asphalt. Scattered across the pristine green lawn were dozens of flimsy cardboard boxes, ripped open and overflowing with Darren's belongings. His custom Italian suits were crumpled in the wet dirt. His expensive leather shoes were tossed carelessly into the grass. His golf clubs were sticking out of a crushed bin alongside his gym clothes and his silk ties. Everything he owned, everything I had ever bought for him to make him look like a successful man, was dumped outside like absolute garbage, waiting for the morning trash collection. What is going on? Valerie asked, her voice completely hysterical as she gripped the iron bars. Where is all your stuff, Darren? Who did this to your clothes? Darren did not answer her. His eyes were completely locked on a large white piece of paper securely taped to the center of the wrought iron gates right at his eye level. He slowly reached out and touched the paper, reading the bold black letters printed across it. Valerie leaned over his shoulder and read the formal notice aloud, her voice shaking with pure terror. Notice of change of ownership. This property is now under the exclusive possession of David Sterling, LLC. All previous access codes and keys have been legally revoked. Armed private security is currently on site. Trespassers will be shot under the state of Georgia, stand your ground law. Standing in the deep shadows of the front porch, just visible through the grand oak trees, were two large men holding tactical rifles across their chests. The tech billionaire had made sure his new investment was completely impenetrable. Darren stumbled backward away from the gate, as if the iron bars had suddenly caught fire. The house was sold. The money was gone. His belongings were trash. The realization crashed down on his shoulders with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. He had spent the last 4 years living in a magnificent luxury illusion, completely funded by a woman he deeply underestimated. And now that illusion was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Sierra stood a few feet away, staring at the cardboard boxes in the dirt, and the armed guards on the porch. The manufactured sweet baby voice she used to manipulate him completely vanished. She looked at Darren, her eyes incredibly cold and calculating. The young, naive intern was suddenly the most rational and ruthless person in the group. You do not own this house, she stated flatly, breaking the heavy silence. You do not have an unlimited black card. You do not have a $2 million penthouse waiting for us on Monday. You literally have absolutely nothing. Darren turned to her, holding his hands out in a pathetic begging gesture. Baby, please, he stammered, taking a desperate step toward her. It is just a massive misunderstanding. My wife is just being vindictive because she is jealous. I can fix this, Sierra, I promise you. We can go to a nice luxury hotel tonight, and tomorrow I will call my corporate lawyers. We can still have our beautiful life together, just trust me. Sierra let out a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the humid night air. What corporate lawyers, Darren? She asked, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. You cannot even pay for a plate of caviar at a restaurant. Your arrogant brother-in-law is going to federal prison for fraud, and you are locked out on the street with your clothes rotting in the dirt. You are a broke, pathetic liar who was living off his wealthy wife's paycheck this entire time. Darren reached out to grab her arm, desperate to hold on to the very last piece of his inflated ego. But before his fingers could even brush the fabric of her sequined dress, Sierra swung her arm back and slapped him across the face with everything she had. The sharp, violent crack echoed loudly down the quiet, upscale neighborhood street. Darren's head snapped violently to the side, his cheek instantly turning a burning red. Do not ever touch me, she hissed, her eyes narrowing with pure hatred. Sierra turned around and pulled out her smartphone, opening a rideshare application. A black SUV happened to be turning the corner down the street. She flagged it down, waving her arms without a single second thought. Valerie was sobbing loudly, leaning against the hood of the least luxury sedan, but Sierra did not even look back at either of them. She opened the back door of the SUV, climbed inside, and sped away into the night, leaving Darren standing in the dirt, completely broke, homeless, and entirely alone. Darren spent the rest of that weekend sleeping in the driver's seat of his least luxury sedan, parked in the dark corner of a cheap motel parking lot, because his debit cards did not even have enough funds to cover a $50 room. His stomach was completely empty, and his mind was spiraling into absolute panic. Monday morning arrived, bringing the harsh and unforgiving reality of a regular work week. Darren had nowhere else to go. He drove straight to my corporate headquarters in downtown Atlanta. He walked through the heavy glass revolving doors wearing the exact same wrinkled weekend clothes from Saturday, looking entirely out of place among the sleek marble floors and the sharp tailored suits of my employees. He marched directly past the front reception desk, ignoring the frantic calls of the receptionist. He demanded to see me, claiming it was a family emergency and that he was the husband of the chief executive officer. The receptionist calmly informed him that I was currently out of the country on business and instructed him to leave the premises immediately. Darren refused. His desperation turned into blind rage. He started screaming my name, echoing through the massive lobby and causing a severe disruption among the corporate staff and high-profile clients arriving for their morning meetings. He yelled that I was trying to ruin his life and that he had a legal right to access the executive suites. He tried to sprint past the security turnstiles toward the private elevator banks, but he did not make it very far. 3 massive corporate security guards descended on him in a matter of seconds. They did not hesitate and they did not care who he claimed to be. They tackled Darren hard, knocking him right onto the polished marble floor. The impact pushed the wind completely out of his lungs. They pinned his arms firmly behind his back, pressing his face against the cold stone. Darren struggled and gasped for air, shouting that they were assaulting him and threatening to sue the entire company. Right at that moment, the soft melodic chime of the executive elevator echoed clearly through the quieted lobby. The polished steel doors slid open. Darren managed to turn his head, hoping to see me stepping out so he could beg for mercy. But I was thousands of miles away enjoying a fresh croissant at a cafe in Paris. Instead of me, a tall, older white man stepped out of the elevator. It was my lead corporate attorney, Mr. Harrington. Harrington was a ruthless legal shark who charged over $1,000 an hour and took immense personal pleasure in financially destroying parasites like my husband. Mr. Harrington walked slowly over to where Darren was pinned to the floor. His expensive leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble. He looked down at Darren with an expression of absolute disgust, like he had just stepped on a cockroach. Tucked under Harrington's arm was a massive, heavy black binder overflowing with legal documents and colorful sticky notes. Harrington did not ask the guards to let Darren up. He stood right over him and casually dropped the thick, heavy binder directly onto Darren's chest. Darren grunted as the weight of the paper hit him. "Consider yourself formally served," Mr. Harrington stated, his voice echoing clearly for everyone in the lobby to hear. "Inside that binder, you will find the official petition for the dissolution of your marriage. My client is filing for divorce under the grounds of infidelity, financial abuse, and gross marital misconduct. There is also a secondary civil lawsuit filed against you for forgery, identity theft, and attempted real estate fraud." Darren stared up at the lawyer, his eyes wide with sheer terror. He tried to speak to deny the allegations, but Harrington simply held up a hand to silence him. "Do not waste your breath," Harrington continued coldly. "We already submitted the audio recordings of you and Kevin conspiring to forge my client's signature. We also submitted the security footage of you bringing an unlicensed and corrupt medical professional into her home. The Federal Bureau of Investigation already has the complete file. Your brother-in-law is currently sitting in a federal holding cell, and you are officially listed as a co-conspirator in a federal wire fraud investigation." Darren started to cry right there on the floor of my corporate lobby. The reality of the situation was entirely inescapable. He was going to lose his freedom, and his reputation was completely destroyed. But Mr. Harrington was not finished. The ruthless lawyer crouched down slightly, bringing his face closer to Darren's, sweating, panicked face, to deliver the final lethal blow to his fake wealthy lifestyle. "There is one more detail you should be aware of," Harrington said, a thin, cruel smile spreading across his face. "That beautiful $150,000 diamond ring you purchased for your young mistress on Saturday morning. You charged it to a supplementary account linked to my client's corporate profile. Due to the active fraud investigation and your documented attempts to steal her assets, we successfully petitioned the bank to legally separate that specific debt. The entire balance of the diamond ring has been transferred exclusively into your personal name. It is now an unsecured personal debt, and because you have no liquid assets, the bank has already applied the maximum penalty interest rate. It is accruing hundreds of dollars in late fees every single day. Have a wonderful week, Darren. The security guards hauled Darren up from the floor, dragging him by his arms out the front doors and throwing him out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The heavy glass doors locked behind him. He was completely stranded on the concrete, clutching the massive binder of his own destruction. Realizing he was now a homeless man who owed a bank over $150,000 for a ring that belonged to a girl who had already blocked his phone number. While Darren was sitting on the hot concrete outside my corporate building, I was sitting on a wrought iron balcony in Paris, enjoying the crisp morning air and a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. My phone vibrated softly on the small glass table next to my croissant. I glanced at the screen and saw Valerie's name flashing. I had ignored her calls all weekend, letting her stew in the panic of her husband's arrest, but today I felt generous enough to listen. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. Renee. Oh my God, Renee, please do not hang up. Valerie sobbed the moment the line connected. Her voice was completely unrecognizable, stripped of all the snark and arrogance she usually carried. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air between her words. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked out over the cobblestone streets. I am listening, Valerie, I said, my voice perfectly flat. It is Kevin, she cried, her voice cracking with hysteria. He has been in a federal holding cell since Saturday night. They denied him standard bail because he is considered a flight risk with offshore accounts. The judge set his bond at $500,000, Renee, and they froze absolutely everything. Our checking accounts, our savings, the kids' college funds, it is all gone. The FBI is threatening to seize the condo because they said it was purchased with laundered commission money. We are going to lose our home. I listened to her weep. This was the exact same woman who stood in my foyer just a few days ago wearing a designer handbag I purchased, telling me I was an overly sensitive, angry black woman who needed to learn her place. She was the woman who sat in a private dining room drinking $2,000 champagne and laughing while her racist husband gave a toast to my downfall. Renee, please, Valerie begged, her pride completely shattered. I know Darren messed up. I know what he did was unforgivable. And I am so sorry we did not tell you about the blonde intern. But Kevin was just dragged into this. Darren manipulated him into processing that loan. You have to believe me. You have to wire the bail money to the court, Renee. You are the only one with the liquid capital to get him out. We are family. You cannot just let the father of my children rot in a federal prison. I let her finish her desperate plea. I let the silence stretch over the international phone line, allowing her to feel the absolute crushing weight of her reality. She actually thought the word family was a magic spell that could erase years of disrespect and complicity. You have a very selective memory, Valerie, I finally said, my voice cold and sharp as a knife. Darren did not drag Kevin into anything. Kevin orchestrated the entire fraud. Kevin found the corrupt doctor. Kevin submitted the forged documents. He did it because he genuinely believed he was smarter than me. He thought my money was his playground. But we are family, Valerie sobbed desperately, trying to interrupt me. We were never family, Valerie, I corrected her smoothly. You sat at that table at Le Bilboquet and you toasted to my betrayal. You smiled in my face while secretly cheering for a 23-year-old girl to take my place. You allowed your husband to degrade me and insult my race while you drank the champagne I paid for. So here is my advice to you. Tell Kevin to use his superior intellect to post his own bail. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, disconnecting the call. I did not block her number immediately. I wanted her to try calling back so she could experience the sound of my phone ringing endlessly without an answer. She was entirely on her own. She would have to pack up her condo and figure out how to survive in the real world without my corporate checkbook acting as her safety net. Back in Atlanta, Darren's mother Eleanor was also feeling the sting of the collapsing dominoes. Valerie had immediately called her mother, sobbing about my refusal to pay the $500,000 bail. Eleanor, fueled by delusional entitlement and southern rage, grabbed her phone to call me. She planned to leave a nasty, screaming voicemail demanding that I fulfill my duties as a wife and a daughter-in-law. She dialed my number, her face red with anger, ready to unleash her hypocritical fury. But Eleanor did not even get the chance to hear my voicemail greeting. Instead, she was met with a cold automated carrier message stating that the number she was trying to reach had permanently restricted her access. She lowered the phone, realizing she was completely cut off and isolated in the mess her son had created. 6 months passed. The harsh Atlanta winter settled over the city, and Darren was feeling every single freezing degree of it. He was no longer the arrogant king of the castle wearing custom Milanese suits and sipping vintage champagne. Darren was living in a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled permanently of stale cigarettes, damp mildew, and utter failure. The federal wire fraud and conspiracy investigation was still actively pending, hanging over his head like a heavy guillotine. Because his name was directly tied to a major FBI white-collar crime case, no reputable firm in the entire state would even look at his resume. He could not pass a basic background check. His credit score was completely obliterated, making it impossible for him to even rent a decent apartment. The bank had aggressively pursued the $150,000 debt from the diamond ring he bought for Sierra. With the maximum penalty interest rates applied, the balance had ballooned into an impossible mountain of debt. His phone rang incessantly with automated collection calls and threats of wage garnishment. He was currently working a brutal cash-under-the-table job washing greasy pots and pans at a local diner just to pay for his daily meals and the weekly rate at the miserable motel. He spent his long, agonizing days scrubbing cheap ceramic plates, while his mind tormented him with memories of the buttery Wagyu beef and imported caviar he used to order without a single second thought. One freezing Tuesday evening, Darren was walking down the busy streets of downtown Atlanta after a grueling 12-hour shift at the diner. His thin coat offered absolutely no protection against the biting wind. As he walked past the High Museum of Art, he noticed a crowd of paparazzi and a long line of luxury vehicles waiting patiently at the curb. A highly exclusive corporate charity gala was just coming to an end. Darren stopped in the shadows, pulling his collar up against the cold, watching the wealthy elite stepping out of the glowing glass doors. It was the exact world he used to belong to, the world he thought he had conquered. And then he saw her. Renee walked out of the massive double doors, wearing a stunning emerald green silk gown that caught the flashes of the cameras perfectly. She was flanked by several prominent industry leaders and tech investors, laughing and conversing with effortless grace. She looked absolutely incredible. She was glowing, radiating a profound sense of absolute power and complete peace. She had not just survived his pathetic attempt to destroy her, she had ascended to an entirely new echelon of success. A sleek, black chauffeured Maybach pulled smoothly up to the curb to receive her. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the heavy rear door. Seeing her standing there about to leave, Darren felt a sudden, frantic desperation clawing violently at his throat. He forgot about his dirty clothes and the pending federal charges. He only saw the woman who used to solve every single one of his problems with a simple swipe of her credit card. Renee. He screamed, his voice cracking in the cold air. He lunged forward, bursting out of the shadows and pushing toward the red carpet. Renee, please, baby, please, it is me. He did not even make it within 10 feet of her. 2 massive private security guards stepped smoothly into his path, reacting with lightning speed. They did not flinch or hesitate. One of the guards placed a massive hand flat against Darren's chest and shoved him backward with effortless, brutal force. Darren stumbled over his own worn-out shoes and fell hard onto the freezing concrete, scraping his hands and tearing the knee of his cheap trousers. The sudden commotion caused Renee to pause. She stopped right by the open door of the Maybach and turned her head to look over her bare shoulder. Darren looked up at her from the dirty sidewalk, tears streaming rapidly down his face. Renee, please help me. he begged, his voice pathetic and weak, echoing in the cold night. I have absolutely nothing left. I am so sorry, please just help me. Darren waited for her to yell at him. He waited for a look of intense anger or even a look of smug satisfaction. He thought she would at least smile at his agonizing misery or pull out her phone to record his total downfall. But as Renee looked down at him lying there on the pavement, there was absolutely no emotion on her beautiful face at all. Her eyes were completely blank. It was an expression of total and utter indifference. She did not see a husband who broke her heart. She did not even see an enemy worth hating. She simply saw a piece of insignificant trash on the sidewalk that someone else was going to clean up. Without saying a single word to him, she turned her head away and gracefully stepped into the plush back seat of the luxury vehicle. The heavy door clicked shut, and the dark-tinted window slowly rolled up. As the Maybach smoothly pulled away from the curb, I did not look back. I did not check the rearview mirror to see Darren picking himself up off the freezing concrete. He was no longer a part of my reality. He was just a ghost haunting the streets of a city he used to think he owned. The justice system moved with a swift and beautiful precision over the next few months. Kevin, the arrogant white broker who loved to lecture me about high society, was convicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and conspiracy. The judge did not show him any mercy. He sentenced Kevin to 5 long years in a federal penitentiary and permanently revoked his real estate license. Kevin lost his firm, his freedom, and his smug superiority. He went from wearing custom suits to an orange jumpsuit in the blink of an eye. Valerie could not handle the absolute humiliation of being married to a convicted felon with completely frozen assets. She filed for divorce immediately, but she walked away with absolutely nothing because the federal government had seized everything they owned. The last I heard, Valerie was living in a cramped studio apartment and working the cash register at a local grocery store, complaining to any customer who would listen about how unfair life was to her. And Darren, my ex-husband, who thought my empire was his personal playground, was completely erased from the elite circles of Atlanta. Without my name attached to his, he was entirely invisible. He was just another broke man with a ruined credit score and a massive mountain of legal debt, completely shut out of the luxury life he desperately craved. I stepped out onto the wrought iron balcony of my new apartment in the heart of Paris. The Eiffel Tower glittered brilliantly in the distance, casting a warm golden light over the historic city. I leaned against the cold metal railing holding a crystal glass of expensive Bordeaux and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. For years I had convinced myself that my success was a burden to the people I loved. I had allowed an insecure, mediocre man and his toxic family to make me feel like my ambition was a flaw. They tried to weaponize my identity against me, calling me an angry black woman whenever I demanded basic respect. But standing here completely free, I realized the absolute truth about black girl magic. It is not just about the ability to build incredible things out of absolutely nothing. It is about the fierce, unapologetic courage to protect what you have built from those who try to tear it down. I had worked twice as hard to get half the recognition, and I was never going to shrink myself again just to make a small man feel incredibly tall. My wealth, my peace, and my success were not marital assets to be stolen or shared with parasites. They were the direct result of my relentless resilience. The greatest tragedy of my marriage was not that Darren cheated on me with a 23-year-old intern. The real tragedy was that he actually believed he could replace a queen with a pawn while still living comfortably inside my castle. He completely misunderstood his position on the chessboard. I took a slow sip of my wine, smiling at the glittering Parisian skyline. My empire was secure. My corporate trust was expanding globally, and my heart was finally at peace. The storm they tried to drown me in was the exact same water I used to wash them out of my life completely. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with a woman who owned the bank, and they ended up bankrupt in every possible way. Never hand the keys to your kingdom to a jester. Like and subscribe if you believe the best revenge is realizing you were the prize all along. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to walk away from people who tried to dim your light to make themselves shine. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your power belongs entirely to you.